let's dive into today's topic. Hi, everyone. I am Jason Ganz. I am the CTO at Data for Progress. All right, so quick agenda. We are going to start with an intro to polling and kind of the data and logistical challenges in running a good poll. And as part of that, we are going to have a live demonstration. We're going to do a quick poll of all of you today to see what our favorite ice cream flavor is. And then we're going to work through that as if that was a real poll to kind of get a sense of what this looks like on real operational data. So I don't know if you want to share that link in the chat. Awesome. And then people want to take that now, or we'll pause for a sec to do that. Then we are going to look at the data operations and practical usages of how we use DBT at Data for Progress and how we help use that to benchmark our polling to make sure that the data that we're using is actually accurate and representing real world conditions, and making sure that we're also doing everything we can to pick up on quickly shifting trends. And then finally, we're going to talk about the importance of democratizing your data within your organization. So this is really important, obviously, in political polling, but it's also important in any sort of data organization. All righty, are my slides stuck? There it is. So first off, what is Data for Progress? So Data for Progress is a think tank that uses data to push for progressive change in America. We support things like the Green New Deal and Medicare for All. That being said, this is a technical presentation which will hopefully be useful for anyone, no matter what your organization does, and I have promised to stay away from any sort of thorny, divisive topics that are going to cause people to clamor in the chat. So that means we will not be discussing today whether you should be using lagging or leading comments in your SQL. All right, let's get into it. I'm sure most everyone that is on here has been following with different amounts of intensity the polling leading up to the election that we have coming up. But what is a poll? We always think of a poll when we're reading it as the result. We are showing 45% for one outcome, 43% for another. But to get to that outcome, there's a lot of really complicated and thorny issues that you have to determine, which come down to two things. There is your sample, which is the actual raw data that goes into your poll. And then there is the weighting of the poll, how you ensure that your raw sample is transformed to be representative to the population you're trying to target. So at this point, let's do a quick pause from the presentation and look at the data from our survey. So for this survey, we were looking and seeing what the favorite ice cream flavor of people within the community was. So we have a really nifty tool set up that is allowing us to actually run this on live data out of BigQuery. And so you can see here, we have our raw results coming in, and each row here is one respondent from each of you. So we are asking some simple demographic questions here, age, and then what type of ice cream flavor people want. For example, this row is under 30, and this person likes cookies and cream. And so the first thing to note when looking at polling data is it's always really important to start with the micro and then move up the macro. It helps get a sense who the actual individual respondents are, to remember that we're not just working with aggregated data here, we're working with real opinions from real people. And staying grounded in that is always super, super helpful when trying to make sure that you are using that data well. And then once you have a sense of what the raw data looks like, you can go and look at a summary view. Looking at our responses here, it looks like cookie dough and mint chocolate chip are kind of running away with it, with cookie dough at 31% and mint chocolate chip at 22% of the vote. So this would be our raw sample for our data. Our poll went out into the field and we got this back. But when we're looking at this, we know that the people, say we were trying to determine the preferences, not just of the people in this chat, but of DBT users overall. And we think that DBT users are 50% under the age of 30 and 50% over the age of 30. That's where weighting comes in. And when you take a survey and you weight it, you say, okay, how many of these people actually in my sample, how do they match my target population? Because I'm going to guess that we have a relatively younger crowd here and we don't actually have 50% under 30 and 50% over 30. And so we can go and we can do survey weighting in this to say, all right, we're going to modify the weight for this such that we match it exactly. So we can see here, this is our DBT project, and actually let's do a run real quick. So what we're doing here is we're taking the raw data, we're taking and we're processing it, we're applying weights to make sure it's representative, and then we're gonna look at those weights and see what the actual true ice cream preference is if we had a representative survey. So the good news here is this column, our weight modifier, represents how different we think the person is from the actual, if we were to have a one-to-one match. If we had exactly hit our sample population targets, then the weight modifier for everyone would be 1. But it looks like we have had slightly more people that are under 30 than over 30. So we're weighting the people that are under 30 down a little bit to say, okay, in a representative world, there would be slightly less people that looked like you and slightly more people that were in the over 30 presentation. So, drum roll please, we are going to find out the representative favorite ice cream flavors of the DBT community. And all right, great. So it looks like cookie dough and mint chocolate chip are still the winners. And there's actually very little difference here between the weighted and the unweighted. So it looks like in our estimation of what this population would look like, we actually did really good. So if we go into the field and we see that our population, our predicted population and our actual population are super similar, that's always a great result because that means that the people you are collecting closely match the predicted demographics of the election or whatever it is you are trying to match up. Now, we just used a very simple weighting schema where we picked one demographic and we just said it's 50% over, 50% under. In the real world, it gets a lot more complex, and figuring out what you weight on and how you weight on it is super, super important. So a good example of this is that in 2016, there was one dimension that was often not being weighted on that caused people in the polling community to miss an extremely important trend and led them to underestimate Donald Trump's chances of winning the election. And that was education. So what we saw in 2016 is more college-educated people were getting really amped up to answer polls. When people were dialing, when people were asking, do you want to take a survey? College-educated people were extremely amped up to take that poll and say, I'm not voting for Donald Trump, I'm voting for Hillary Clinton. And so we got more college-educated people in our polls. And what that meant was that college-educated people were overrepresented, and people without a college education who were more likely to support Trump were underweighted. So what you saw is that if you were waiting on education, then you would see Clinton with a 4-point lead, which is still more than she led by, than she actually hit by. So there were other misses. But if you weren't accounting for education, then you saw Hillary Clinton having an 8-point lead. So figuring out what demographics to weight on, what populations to weight on is incredibly important for making sure that you are actually getting a representative survey. That's kind of the basics of weighting. Let's take a look at the overall data challenges involved when running a poll. So the first is you have a survey idea and you're like, oh, we're going to go into the field and test something. And the first thing that you do with any poll is you write a questionnaire. When you're writing a questionnaire, this is one of those things that people might not think of as explicitly a data or non-data task, but the way that you write that question is going to ultimately have huge, huge implications on how your poll comes out. A couple of examples of this are you randomizing your responses? Because if you're not randomizing your responses, then people are just going to be more likely to pick the one that's up top. Are you asking people if they agree or disagree with something? Because people in general like being agreeable. So if you give them do you agree versus do you disagree, as opposed to two binary options that they can select between, you'll often find hugely different results. And super importantly is you have to be able to take complex topics and boil them down such that they can be expressed in a few sentences to a population that is largely consisting of people without a college degree. And you have to make sure it actually makes sense to them, because otherwise you're not actually capturing anything useful. So you have to really be able to practice a large amount of placing yourself into other people's shoes and figuring out how would other people react to this question? And you need to try really hard to remove your own preconceptions when writing that question. Otherwise, you're just going to get data which already confirms your pre-established beliefs. So we have our questionnaire, we have it written. Now it's time to go into the field. This is where it gets really interesting. How do you actually get people into a survey? So there's a number of different ways that you can get people to take a survey. You can dial them on their phone and ask them with live humans. This was for a while considered to be the benchmark gold standard method of getting people to take polls. The problem with this is that these are mostly done on landlines, and I don't know about you all in the chat, but I personally don't know just about anyone that has a landline. So thinking about the mode and how you actually get people into your survey has hugely important data considerations. And the things here to think through are, do you want to do live phone? Are you texting them a link to your survey? There's also pre-existing panels where you can go and kind of get people who have opted in to take surveys, but then you're surveying people who have opted in to take surveys, which you'll be shocked to know sometimes behave differently from people that haven't done that. So thinking about how to kind of take all of these disparate ways of getting people into your poll, some of which have strengths and weaknesses that complement each other, and put them together into one single data product is a really interesting, thorny data challenge. And then finally, once you have your raw data, then it's time to weight it. So this is where you get into considerations of things like, do you weight on education, which, as we already went through, answer is yes. But there's a number of other questions in terms of how you weight your data, what goes into it, and how you set your targets that can have hugely important implications for the data that actually comes out. So really, whenever you're looking at a poll that comes up in the news that people are talking through, it's important to think, how did they write their questionnaire? How do they field it? And how did they weight it? And if you're able to get the answer for that, then you're going to be a lot more able to know what the strengths and weaknesses of this particular poll are, because there are different types of ways of doing this that have different strengths and weaknesses, and being able to kind of look at that and analyze it can give you a much clearer sense of how the poll is created. So for us, as we're running our polls, there are so many different trends that we want to track to ensure that our sample is getting collected accurately and that our weights are getting applied correctly. And so this has been a problem that had been going on ever since we first started running polls, which is, how do you actually track this, track the trends, and make sure you're staying on top of it? And that is where we found we were able to get huge, huge value out of implementing dbt into our post-survey analysis stack. So our actual survey weighting is not done in SQL in dbt like this example was. The survey weighting is done in Python. But where dbt fits in is dbt allowed us to create the intelligent data model to actually compare our trends across surveys and over time, such that it wasn't just kind of me going in and fiddling with Excel spreadsheets and sending pictures to people, but we have live interactive dashboards which contain the historicals of all of our surveys and let people filter across different demographic breakdowns. It lets them look at the raw data, the weighted data, and really see what trends are going on both in the raw data and the weighted data so that we can know what movement is happening, what we think is real movement, what might just be movement in terms of who is responding, and being able to kind of really get a good sense of intuition about what's going on. All right, so getting into the nitty-gritty a little bit. So the way this works is, so a survey is created and fielded in the survey platform. For us, that is Qualtrics. And then from there, we use a custom-built ETL to load the data out of Qualtrics and into our Postgres database. And then in the Postgres database is where the weights are applied and initial data quality checks are done. From there, once the weights are applied, we run dbt on this data, and then that gets fed into a Periscope dashboard where every time a survey comes out of the field, we do a couple quick checks, sanity checks, make sure the data looks good, and then kind of set it aside for later when we do our big data quality reviews. And so why dbt? Why are we using dbt for this project? And honestly, it's been such a lifesaver in terms of being able to take data which was not transformed for analysis, data that we were using for our internal operations, and then turn it into data which is super easy to model, super easy to summarize, and we are able to create summary views and tables such that you can actually get and use the data and answer questions quickly so that we know very soon after a survey comes out of the field, are we hitting our benchmarks? Is this data looking like it has all the hallmarks of a high quality poll that's going to give us a truly representative response? All right, and so what does this look like? When our survey comes out of the field, it first comes into our database as a wide table. And wide tables are pretty easy to work with by themselves. There's one response per record, and you have a column for all your demographics, a column for weights, and a column for each of your questions. And so when you're analyzing one survey, this is actually a relatively easy thing to work with. The problem, way too many tables. So we do somewhere in the order of 2 to 4 surveys per week. And so very quickly, our database just started getting littered with these one-off tables where we just couldn't compare across them, trying to get them all into one place and do cross-survey analysis and pick up on the trends, which are so important when thinking through how are things shifting, what's moving, how are different geographies behaving. So it was pretty clear early on that we couldn't just do analysis on the wide tables because it's so important to be able to, when you're doing this, have a picture that goes fully across all of your data so you can really know what's going on. So from there, we moved our data into long tables. And the great thing about long tables is they were easily storing all of our survey information in just 3 to 5 tables. And so these tables were super simple. And basically every response to every survey was turned into a key value pair. So field, age, value under 30. Field, favorite ice cream, value, chocolate. The problem with this is that while it enabled us to get all of our historicals into a few tables, it was very difficult to work with. You would open it up, you would try and query it. The queries were slow. You had to join the data to itself a bunch of times to be able to get anything interesting. And so we technically had all the data together so that we could operate off of it, but it was really, we couldn't do anything with it in terms of analysis. That's where we went and we started working on transformed long tables. And the transformed long tables combine the best features of both the wide and the long tables. So we were able to have all of our demographic and weighting information on every row, but then everything that was just a normal question continues to be a key value pair in the survey. So once you're doing that, then you can pretty easily work with this data and query it as you would expect. So once that was done, the whole organization suddenly had access to all of this information, and we were able to then use this as the base to create a series of macros that allowed us to have summary tables, which we use to capture all of the most important tracking trends that we have, things like favorables, horse race, and the benchmarks that are really important for us to be looking at as time goes on. And so when we decided to invest in this, we wanted to think through what data meant for us as an organization, as a data-focused organization, and as a progressive organization. We thought it was really important to have a philosophy of how we use data. And so there are a couple different ways that you can think through this, and obviously I'm coming in here with a bit of an agenda, but let's walk through that. The first is what I like to call the whiz kid or gut feel way of making data-backed decisions. And so that's where in every organization you have a couple people, maybe they're an executive, maybe they're a high-level analyst, who kind of control all of the numbers, and they will occasionally let other people in the organization see other numbers, but mostly they exist to, quote, know all of the trends, be the ones that are in charge of knowing the data. And if they're good, then this can be helpful sometimes. But the bad thing is this puts you heavily reliant on a few stakeholders, and any sort of individual biases, individual blind spots are hugely magnified if you're kind of expecting a couple people within the organization to be the holders of the data and the decision makers on the data. And so this is largely the way that political data was done prior to the last 4 years. And then after in the Democratic Party, I cannot speak to the other side, but I would imagine it. And then, so after 2016, there was a huge move towards using incredibly fancy data science techniques to kind of be like, oh, well, clearly we missed something there. The way to fix this is to have the most complicated algorithms, the deepest neural nets. And the thing about this is, like, you can definitely pick up on trends that less sophisticated methods miss. It sounds really fancy and impressive when you're going out and you're trying to sell people on your data techniques. But what you find is that you actually have all of the exact same problems of the whiz kid, where you end up heavily reliant on a couple of stakeholders and individual biases are magnified, but then also individual biases are obscured, your complexity spirals out of control. These systems are very fragile and very difficult to debug. So for a lot of reasons, this ends up being something that sounds great at the start, but can have trouble when you're trying to actually implement it into practical decision making. So there's a third way, what I like to call the town hall method of using data. And with this, you allow as many people as possible, preferably everyone in the organization, to have access to the data and be able to walk through, understand things, and make their own decisions. And critically, you don't just hand everyone a pile of data and be like, all right, great, we're a data-based organization, look at this dashboard, this is it. What you do from there is then you have time where people get together, they walk through data, and they discuss it. I'm sure a lot of people here have gone through dashboard review sessions where everyone's in the room and everyone's clamoring, why is this number up? Why is this number down? And like, the truth is, it does get messy, just like town halls in our democracy get messy. But when you commit to doing this and you commit to giving everyone a voice and letting people come forward and actually pull out trends and do their own analysis, and you give them the tools to work through the data themselves and then a voice, you find that you actually are able to pick up on things that get missed, whether you're trying to keep data heavily clustered in a couple stakeholders, or if you're trying to purely go through a complex machine learning approach. And so what this looks like for us is we have multidisciplinary expert reviews. So things where different people on the team are good at different things. We have people that are experts in the actual methodology of here's how you get polls into the hands of individuals. We have quantitative experts, people who are very knowledgeable about statistics, political experts, subject matter experts coming in who know the actual policy that we're polling, that we're working through. And what we find is that when you get these people in the room and you give them access to data which can be worked through, filtered, presented quickly, and you can drill down and see what's going on, then you're able to much more quickly surface things that need to be discussed and come to a conclusion on them. So ultimately, it requires a commitment. It requires everyone taking time out of their day to get together and review it. But when you do this, you get the best of individual expertise from all the people on your team. You get the best of actually understanding what's going on in your data, and you listen to people. Because I think a thing that's super important for all data professionals to remember is that while we might be good at getting data together in one place, everyone is an expert in their own job and at their own life. And so this is something we focus on really heavily in polling when we try and make sure we have empathy for the survey takers and that they are the expert in their opinions. And it's something that then we try and also focus on internally, where everyone, whether they're analysts, whether they're junior or senior, is able to take the elements of the organization and the work we're doing and use the data to be able to make us a more effective organization and put out more accurate data. And so the thing I want to end on is the way this works best is that we have found is when you think of data as a utility. A utility is something that at its best just works. It's not complicated. It's not that there are different people that have varying levels of access to it, although that is obviously what we see in real life in too many situations. But when it works, then people can start to rely on it. They can start to know it's there. And when you think of data as a utility, you think, oh, I'm going to be able to look at this number and have accurate, well-modeled data. I'm going to be able to use that to go about my day, to make decisions, and to be able to use this in the work that I'm doing. And I don't know of any other technology that is more of a force multiplier in doing that than dbt, because dbt actually allows you to create data which is intelligently modeled and organized so that people who probably don't want to sit around and write long SQL queries can actually have access to it and see it. And it's been super, super exciting to be able to work on this, and we really appreciate the time to walk through this with you all today, and be happy to take any questions now.
Excellent. Oh my goodness. What a journey from ice cream to the politics of Australian leading commas and everywhere in between. Some really good takeaways, I think, for all data teams there. So for those of you on the call, I encourage you to just put some questions into the chat, and then I'll sort of call on you to ask those questions out loud. Fortunately, my coworker Janessa has started us off. So Janessa, are you able to ask a question?
Do you want me to start with the question about uppercase DBT, or?
I blame the people who named it.
Wait, what was that?
I blame the people who named it, not
we're not
the community.
Jason personally responsible.
Yeah.
Okay, I will accept that. Jason, I was just curious why you went with this workflow. I think that with survey data, it's usually like the data volumes are small enough that Excel is just fine. And my guess is that there are a lot of analysts who might feel a little bit daunted by using DBT to do this, but it seems like the trade-offs were worth it for you. I'm curious if that was ever something that your team debated about, or if you just knew this was the way to go, or what your thinking was there.
That is such a good question. And so Excel is totally fine for survey data when you're analyzing a single survey. And honestly, most surveys we get, I still open it up in Excel as a first check. I kind of look at a few rows, make sure the data looks good. Where we start to lose efficiency when doing Excel is, so two things. One is there's a lot of benchmarks that we know we want to look at for every survey. And so I would find myself going into every survey we did, I would make like the same 6 pivot tables, and then I would go and I would send them to the team. I was like, all right, here's how we're doing on these variables. And that worked pretty well to get those 6, but then there are 2 things that happen after you do that. The first is someone asks, okay, well, how does this compare to last week? How does this compare to 2 weeks ago? And so when you do that, then I'm like, oh God, because I would have to go find the Excel file for that and then do the same thing over and over again. So it was these repeating benchmarking statistics that were super, super useful to be able to get dashboarded is thing one. And then thing two is kind of the power and flexibility of being able to drill down in, like, use relatively standard BI things like different filters and different slices and views was really, really helpful to be able to apply across all of those. Because if I took our 6 benchmarking metrics and then it's like, okay, well, what does that look like for Democrats under 45? Then all of a sudden it's redoing that 6 more times. And if we want to look at that 5 different ways on every survey, it starts to get a little bit less manageable. So once we were doing that for a while, but then we reached a point where in order to be doing all of the interrogation of the data that we're committed to doing, to being able to make sure that we were actually following through and really making sure we were diving deep into it, then we had to have a system that allowed us to do it a little less painfully.
Excellent. I actually opened up Excel the other night and I felt really nostalgic. I don't know, Jason, if you feel the same way after like being in SQL land for a while.
I love working in Excel.
Oh
yeah,
my gosh.
Got together a good pivot table, it feels great.
It's exactly what I did yesterday. That's really cool. Mila, are you able to introduce yourself? I forgot to nudge Nessa to do that, and go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, hello everyone. Mila from Fishtown here. I have a really possibly controversial question to ask you. So I've crossed paths with a number of political operatives and lobbyists, career lobbyists over the years. And one thing that I find really interesting is kind of the landscape has been described to me as you have nowadays, in the last couple of years, really data-driven people on one end of the spectrum. But then you have political people and pundits on the other end of the spectrum. And the truth is no matter how data-driven they think they are, they really aren't. It's just kind of a thing that there's not a lot of education on how to interact with data. So a lot of people treat polls as a key problem with about 40 years of political science research, which is that the statistics that's been used there is just bunk. Obviously, there are things that we can improve. And I'm curious, with you guys really trying to use more sophisticated data methods, if you've run into kind of a culture problem, or if you run into trying to communicate these issues with people.
That is a fantastic question. All right, so the question being, how do we get people to use our data when there are people who are maybe purely politics people, not data people? And also, how does this interact with potentially polls being a noisy indicator? So the first response here is that, so our executive director has a little quote that he drills into us all the time, which is, people don't care how much they know until they know how much you care. And it sounds like, like it's a cute little aphorism, but it's really, really true. And one of the things that we have found kind of as like a newer entrant onto the data landscape is that there is a cleavage in terms of organizations who are data first and who will follow the data wherever they think the data goes. And this is often combined with an attempt to have very complicated data methods. And then there are organizations who are mission first with the data informing the mission and informing not the strategy, but the tactics. And as an organization who is focused on the strategy of the values that we hold, with then the tactics being using the data, we find that we're much more able to make inroads with people because we go in and we don't say, we know how to do your job better than you do. We know exactly what you do. We say, you're doing so much, like you're doing all the right things. How can we help? And when we do that, we find that we are able to get people that are very excited and eager to use the data and learn about the data. So it really comes to having a commitment to showing people that we are with them, we care about them, we care about what they have to say. So that's the first answer. The second answer being in terms of the people who are skeptical of polling in general, we proved that empirically. So one of the projects that we did over the Democratic primary was we released a series of polls predicting different state outcomes. And we were, depending on how you measure it, either the first or second most accurate polling operation in the country, ahead of long-running, kind of decades-old institutions. And so we combine it with, one, just empirical evidence that the data that we have actually reflects reality. And this is really important because obviously people are going to think, oh, well, you guys are just going to say whatever fits your narrative. And we actually won't, because that's not helpful for us. So it's being willing to say what we actually read the data to be, even when that doesn't necessarily fit with our goals, but it being the assessment that we have, but only doing that under the larger lens of having people know that we care about them, we're with them, and that this is a kind of long-term strategic partnership.
Thank you so much. I could talk about this for hours, but we'll let other people jump in.
We have a question from my coworker, Jeremy. I do just want to reiterate to the rest of the community, you're welcome to ask questions as well. My coworkers are very, very intelligent questions, but we'd love to hear from the very, very intelligent community as well. But in the meantime, Jeremy, do you want to jump in?
Hey, Jason, this was a great presentation, and thank you so much for giving it. I have a joke first question there that you're welcome to answer or ignore at your will. But I'm curious because we're thinking a lot about data quality and communicating the commitment to data quality right now. How do you feel like that changes when you are working with data sets that are very public facing and the stakes can feel really high versus maybe at a SaaS company where if you've got one wrong number one time, there's like social capital to make up for it later on?
Honestly, it just means it's much more important to focus on data quality, because as someone that previously was at a SaaS company presenting metrics and now is helping with public-facing polls, the stakes feel a lot higher here, which is all the more important that we focus on getting good data and actually using it well. Also, I want to thank Jeremy, who has been a huge help for us as we were getting DBT set up and helping make sure that we are using it to its fullest. But yes, there's no good answer other than it raises the stakes substantially, which means that data quality, data governance, making sure that you're doing all these checks is even more important. And it's also more important to be transparent. So we try and be really transparent with our methodology. This is a little different than you'll see a lot of like house secrets or like we have a way of doing it, polling that is like just our special sauce. And we kind of try and do things the opposite. And you're increasingly seeing that happen as well. So if people are following kind of the election forecaster wars on Twitter, which God help you because they're a lot to follow. So G. Elliott Morris, who is doing the forecasting for The Economist, has been throwing a lot of shade at Nate Silver, because Nate Silver has been artificially inducing uncertainty into his model, because his model is telling him that one outcome is very likely in the election. But Nate Silver doesn't actually think that the outcome is that certain, which Nate's probably right. Like, the data is telling us this election looks not particularly close. But the thing about particularly presidential election data is there just aren't very many data points, and obviously we are in a very unusual year. So having a lot of transparency and humility and realizing that we can't perfectly predict everything, we can't perfectly know everything, has been something that we try and focus on a lot.
I'm going to ask another question, sort of leading on from that. So Jeremy sort of alluded to your previous role where you were working at sort of more, I think, VC funded startup, and sort of how your relationship with data quality has changed. I'm curious whether there's any other, maybe on the more surprising aspects of if someone's used to working in the for-profit sector, if they go into working for a PAC or working in another nonprofit, how those experiences can be really different, or how those experiences can be quite the same.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that the thing that was not necessarily surprising to me, but what was the kind of the biggest learning that I had, and the one that I try and share with other people who are maybe in the tech VC world and are trying to get involved in politics and political data, is how much there is to learn and to spend a lot of time listening to why things are the way they are. And so I started getting involved with Data for Progress just as a volunteer at the beginning of 2018. And it was about 2 years of just not knowing anything and just updating Squarespace pages and really just listening and watching and learning. And then over time, finding small ways that maybe tech can help improve the operations. I think that there is a sense that I think I wanted to believe, and that a lot of people were like, oh, we can kind of fix a lot of the politics just by applying the right technology and throwing enough big data at it or anything like that. And the reality is, it's the people that are working on this are incredibly smart, incredibly talented. They've been working on it for decades, and there are big systemic reasons why things are the way they are, and that it is very possible to get into this and to hopefully be able to nudge things a little bit to make some processes more efficient, but to not necessarily think that, oh, we'll go in, we will, apply agile. What we need to apply agile to campaigns, and just to really go in and listen to the experts, listen to the people that have been working on this, and then find things like DBT, being able to take our data transformations, which are incredibly impactful, and to look for those areas where we can actually make big impact. It requires a lot of listening and kind of learning about why things are the way they are.